Hi, and welcome to our 10 for 10 series. And today we will be looking at a subject which, of course, is relevant to all of us at a certain time in our lives, but in particular for those who are expecting a child. Bezrat Hashem, please God, it should be healthy and all go well. And of course, one of the things that happens when you give birth to a child, it's going to require you to give them a name. So today we're going to look at some of the discussions in halachic literature and different customs surrounding the naming of a child. When do you do it? How should you do it? Who should you name them after? Are there any particular things that you should be concerned about or you should take into account, and so on and so forth? So that's what we'll cover today. So to begin, firstly, I know that as a rabbi, I've had numerous times where parents or expecting parents or parents who've just had children call me to speak about the naming of a child, and there's sometimes a little bit of tension in this regard. Who gets to decide the name? What if they're not in agreement, the parents, in terms of what they want to name their child? So today's Shiur, I hope, will give some perspective, but of course, if you come up with any particular issue that you find has not been addressed in this Shiur, and of course I can't cover everything in the 10 minutes, you're always welcome to give me a call, and I'll be happy to assist you and discuss your particular circumstances. So firstly, the interesting thing is, when it comes to the naming of a child, the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, speaks about how it's one time in a person's life when you get to name a child that you almost have what we call the divine inspiration. You get this prophecy as to know what the name of the child's going to be. So when a parent stands and names their child at the particular event, as we'll discuss, that name, of course, has some divine inspiration, because it says that the name that you are given, the Yiddish name, the Jewish name you're given, has a connection to your soul, to your innermost essence. And so therefore the parents get a sense when they give you that name, and sometimes they don't understand it even consciously, of course, but even subconsciously perhaps, it's much more of a spiritual level that they're giving you that name, and that's why it connects to your essence. So when are we given the name? So in usual times, when things are good, I will discuss a little bit about the coronavirus times in terms of how do we change that minhag, the particular customs. So a boy is usually named at his brit milah, when he's circumcised, and hopefully at 8 days old. Sometimes, of course, the brit is delayed. If the brit is delayed, there are some authorities who say that the child should still be given the name at the sooner possibility when the Torah is read, whilst others say no, we should, even if we're going to be delaying the bris, we should wait until such time to name the child. And of course, if you prefer to name the child, then you have who to rely on, because some parents don't want to wait a few months to give the child a name. Now, if the child is a firstborn and a male, and there's a pidyon haben ceremony and it's being held, some say then we should name that child at that particular ceremony. And of course, if God forbid a child is ill, which has happened numerous times, I've had particular cases where they want to give the child a name as soon as possible, then of course you can give the child a name earlier than when the child has been given a bris, in order to be able to pray for that child. A girl is named preferably at the Torah reading following her birth. Some have the custom, I know the Chabad has the custom, to try and name the child as soon as possible at the first possible Torah reading. So let's say the child was born on a Sunday, then to name the baby girl on a Monday, and so on. Some have the custom to wait until Shabbat, so the first Shabbat after the baby is born, because of course you can get a bigger crowd who will be able to come on the weekend. And the naming is usually done and followed by a feast, by some type of ceremony to celebrate the child getting their Jewish name. Now, today in the coronavirus era, when we don't have the ability to come to shul to have a Torah reading, you are entitled to still give the baby a name. I've done it a few times since coronavirus started. We do a Zoom get-together, and the parents, we say the special naming prayer that names the baby, and we give the baby the name in front of the friends and those that have gathered virtually to celebrate with you. When we're allowed to again mention or get together to go to shul together, then we'll call the father up again, and he can once again ratify, so to speak, the name. The Sephardic tradition, interestingly, they also have a particular ceremony called the Zeved Habat, or the presentation of the daughter. Special Mishaberach, special prayers cited with other several prayers, followed by a celebratory meal in honor of the baby girl. Now the question, as I addressed in the beginning, which is something which does occur every now and again, who has the rights to the name? So this is the general principle and the general guidance. As I said, there are always going to be exceptions. And there are many different customs. But the general custom is that the father chooses the name of the first child and the mother chooses the name of the second child, and then they rotate with any alternate children. And this is a general custom to follow if you don't have a particular community custom or family custom. In other communities, it works the other way around. The mother chooses the name of the first child, and the father chooses the name of the second child, and then they rotate with any subsequent child. However, it's important to stress that whether you follow the custom of the father choosing first or the mother choosing first, they both have to be in agreement with the name. So even if it's the father that says, look, I want the child to be named so-and-so, the mother has to agree. If one of them doesn't agree to the name, then we cannot name that child by that name. There needs to be a consensus and an agreement, and of course that sometimes requires a bit of diplomacy and working out and negotiating and trying to find a compromise if somebody's not necessarily comfortable with the name. So even though one of the spouses gets to choose first, there still needs to be an agreement with the name that they choose. Now, a lot of people like to name children after relatives. So the question is, can you do this? Is it the correct custom and so on? So the Ashkenazic custom is not to name a baby after living individuals. So if somebody's father is still alive, you shouldn't name your child after your living father. And the reason seems to be that it's a merit for a deceased person, somebody who's already passed away, to have a descendant named after him or her, and therefore we'd rather give the name to names. We'd rather name the person after somebody who's passed away, so you bring merit to that person who's already been deceased. However, if the name is given while the person is still alive, then of course we don't change the name. We don't have to redo it. But some do say that you can try and add another name to that additional name. So if you named somebody after a living relative, and then you discovered, oh, I wasn't supposed to do that, there are those who say you can then give that child an additional name, so it's not exactly named after the living relative. Now, in the Sephardic tradition, interestingly enough, their custom there, naming children after living relatives, as well as deceased ones, is encouraged, and they consider it a very big honor for the relative, whether they've passed away or they haven't. You can still name them after a living relative. What about naming after a holy person, a tzaddik, somebody who's a famous Jewish leader? So there are, and I know in the Hasidic circles, many name their children after, let's say, a rebbe, a particular spiritual mentor, so on. And the truth is that's a very encouraged thing. However, you shouldn't name after a rebbe or after a holy tzaddik with having in mind that the child is named after somebody else as well. So if let's say you have a grandfather whose name is Chaim, and you know of a rebbe that you want to name after by the name of Chaim, you shouldn't do it, because in a sense it's almost like it's inappropriate to the rebbe's honor to say, well, I'm naming him after this plus my relative. It should be named after somebody specifically and not mixing a holier person with a person of lesser holiness. So rather fixate and say, look, if I'm going to name him Chaim, make a decision. I'm naming him after the rebbe, or I'm naming him after my relative. Now, in terms of siblings, two siblings should not have the same name. And this is because of what we call the ayin hara, the evil eye. We don't want to cause, God forbid, an evil eye to be cast on any of these children. If it was done mistakenly, and I have heard of a case where that has happened, an additional name should be added to one of the children, which should then be used as the name that they're going to be called by. So if your younger child, or if your first child is named Chaim, and then you name your second child Chaim, and you didn't realize, you should add the name, let's say Shmuel, and now you should call him Shmuel. If a child, God forbid, lo aleinu, dies young, some say that another child in the family should also not be given that same name, while others say no, that if the child's already passed away, you can name any subsequent children after that child who passed away. Now this might seem logical, which it is, but nonetheless it's still stated in halacha that it's forbidden to give the child a name named after a wicked person, an evil person. And because the verse says that the name of the wicked should rot and should not be remembered, and of course giving the child the name of a wicked person is not obviously very good for that person. Now, we have run out of time for today, so tomorrow we can look at just some very quick things about, God forbid, a tragic death. If we have to change the name of a person, what happens when a person gets called up to the Torah, and we'll look at praying for, God forbid, an ill person, as well as the names of prospective spouses that a person might choose in terms of if they're going to be interested in marrying somebody. We'll look at those names as well. So thank you for joining me today, and hopefully you join me back for part 2 tomorrow.